Welcome to On Defense and Security, a podcast that examines domestic and international defense and military affairs. Through conversations, we will bridge the gap between academic research and policy and provide a platform for informed discussions, enabling our listeners to better understand critical issues.
Hi, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Col Nicolas Gauthier. I'm the visiting Defense Fellow at Queen's for this year. And today's guest is Dr. Christian Breede, PhD in War Studies, who's a research assistant for the Department of National Defense, a veteran of 25 years with the Royal Canadian Regiment, with service in Haiti and Afghanistan, and a professor at the Royal Military College at Queen's, at Fraser University, and the University of New Brunswick. Christian, welcome.
Thanks. So great to be here. This is awesome. It's nice to be on the other side of the interview for a little while. It's kind of cool.
Christian, today you'd like to talk to us about leadership and how it applies in the military context and how that relates to character, the people that do the leadership, the people that receive the leadership, and explore that both as a practitioner, given your own military experience, but also as a researcher and academic.
Yeah, no, it's exactly why I was excited to do this. It's interesting how I sort of came to this topic. As you said in the intro, I'm a research analyst right now with the Department of National Defense, and that's really where it's a wonderful team. It's a small team, and we're hoping to grow it, but it's a pretty small team right now where we focus on professional concepts and leader development. And I kind of came to the team in a bit of a roundabout way. First and foremost, there was a former colleague of mine who now runs the team. He read some of my stuff, and when what I found as an academic was nobody reads your stuff. So when somebody does, you kind of jump all over it. And he had reached out a couple of years ago and asked if I would be interested in helping put the finishing touches on what was going to become Trusted to Serve, which was our statement of CAF ethos. And I said, sure, I'd love to. And I found the work fascinating and wanted to do it full time. And so made a shift, left the college, and came to the Canadian Defense Academy on a full-time basis, retired, and carried on as a public servant in civilian attire. And honestly, I haven't really looked back. But when I think about how I started, it had nothing to do with leadership, although of course it did, right? And, I started as a, PhD in War Studies, focusing primarily on international relations, comparative politics, that sort of thing, teaching those security studies focused courses. But as I started to get into it, one, my research area was always sort of on the quote unquote softer side. And I really don't like that term because I think there's nothing soft about looking at social issues and socioeconomic connections and emotions. Nothing of that is soft. That's really, really complicated, messy, muddy stuff that is worthy of academic inquiry. But more importantly, not only that, but taking that academic inquiry and making it practical, making it tactical, making it have impact. And so I started to realize that I've been soaking up leadership my entire life. From the time I was 12 years old, joining the Royal Canadian Air Cadets in middle school, all the way through to what I do right now. And that's been the common thread. And when I think about what it is we're trying to do in the Canadian Armed Forces, for example, I think fundamentally it's about creating high-performance teams. If we can do that, a healthy, high-performance team that's cohesive, we can ask it to do a lot of things, and it's going to do well. And I really think that's, so when you ask me, what leadership is, I think it is the bedrock of what we do in the military. We are professionals in leadership. And it's why I gravitated towards the infantry when I was in uniform. And I think it's part of anyone who claims to be a member of the professional arms, is that to do so means you're a professional in leadership. And so this is really fundamental, sort of core stuff that we're looking at, which really excites me. And I love it every day. It makes me a better person as well as a better professional.
Okay, well, like on your journey as an academic, we often start with definition. Could you define it for me?
Like define leadership?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there's a ton of different definitions. My favorite one is the one, like I said, as I remember as an air cadet, the art of influencing human behavior to achieve an outcome as desired by the leader. interestingly enough, that's not in our doctrine right now in the Canadian Armed Forces. Our leadership definition is actually kind of hard to find. It's buried in our 2005 volume, Conceptual Foundations, which is lots of good stuff in there, but it's awfully dense, and I'm not sure how many folks have actually read it, to be honest. And so there's a definition in there which is largely mirrored by the one that I just rattled off from the Air Cadets. But I think what's more important, because you ask somebody who follows or studies leadership, they will give you a different definition. What I'd much rather focus on is what leaders do. And I think there we start to get a much more rich description of what we're trying to do, sort of an aspiration almost, as opposed to a lofty definition. But, if you forced me to put a definition on it, I think leadership is about knowing what the right thing is to do and trying to figure out a way to get your team to do it in a way that they buy into, and that's really what it comes down to. But like I said, I'm much keener to get at this idea of leadership in terms of what they do. And, this is, I was just on a course last week, actually, the Leading Healthy High Performance Military Teams course written by some veterans of the CAF, run by some veterans of the CAF a few years ago. They started this program and they've been running some contracts and stuff. And I had the opportunity to take part in the course. And that's the approach they took, which I thought was really cool, because in 1983, my favorite leadership book was written, which was called Small Unit Leadership. And it's on the Canadian Army reading lists. And I would highly recommend everyone to check it out. But it's written by an American colonel. And he takes the same approach. He doesn't define leadership, but he has a long list of things that leaders do. And fast forward to another well-known researcher on leadership, Breede Brown, she does the same thing. She doesn't really define leadership. She just looks at what it is that leaders do. So I really like that approach. I think there's a lot there. So a good follow-on question, I guess, would be what the leaders do, right?
I was getting there.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of set myself up for that. And so, for me, they make the call. They make a call. That's what leaders got to do. They got to make a call. They got to make a decision. Hopefully it's the right decision, but if it's not, hopefully it's a decision rooted in the right things, with the right intention, so that negative outcome can be accepted and can perhaps be less damaging. And so I think that's really fundamental to it. Leaders take care of their people. That famous Simon Sinek book, Leaders Eat Last, right? Like that's what leaders do, right? So you can instantly see how helpful it is to think about leadership now in terms of what leaders do in terms of that action, right? You make a call, eat last, take care of your people, accomplish the mission, right? Like it becomes very, very clear in terms of what it is you're trying to achieve. You develop your teams, you pick your successor, right? Like it's all these little things that start to pile up, and it can be far more helpful than some fancy, well-crafted definition.
I think one of the key thing that the new members of the Canadian Forces that are called into leadership roles are worried is that they don't have what it takes, that you have to be born a leader. And given our experience, the amount of effort we put into training and education and research, I suspect our idea is that you can grow leaders, you can help foster the right mindset, the right skills, the right values. So as a specialist in the field, as someone who's researched that, are leaders born or are they made?
Oh, they're absolutely developed. They're made. If they were born, we'd be out of a job. And I'd be a snake oil salesman otherwise, right? There's certainly personality traits, there's predispositions to leadership that certainly would allow someone to gravitate towards it. But ultimately it's something that we create in each other. I think anybody that claims to be sort of a natural leader, I think there's aspects to that I think are true, but I kind of think about like playing basketball, right? Somebody can have a really nice natural jump shot that can be good 40% of the time, but the mechanics are off. There's stuff that's weird that needs to be tweaked, that needs to be fixed. And if anyone's been a big fan of basketball, I'm not sure if you follow it much, but I think of one of the big draft picks from a couple of years ago was Lonzo Ball. right? He was this high flying, super athletic kid out of high school, lots of hype around him coming into the NBA. And he had the wonkiest jump shot that took about 2 seasons to fix, and this is a kid that's supposedly playing at the elite level, right? So there's lots of natural stuff, attributes and things like that, how outgoing you are, if you're a natural storyteller, things, those are all good, but it's got to be shaped and honed and tempered. And I found that myself, as you can probably guess, I really like to talk, I like to tell stories. And that's great. That's helped me a ton in terms of my own leadership journey, but it's also held me back. It's also got me in some trouble because sometimes I don't know when to shut up and listen. Right. Well, and that's been a hard lesson.
Today, that's my job, to shut up and listen. You're on the talking hedge, so by all means, don't restrict yourself and let us into that world that you've dug into, because whether the people listening to you are like military professionals or students researching leadership or organizational theory, leadership really touches everything from like day-to-day life or international relations. Everything is about influence and our ability to organize or lack organization as a species. So like, what are the things that make a leader in your view? What are those characteristics that we should emphasize and grow?
Number one is you got to lead yourself. And I know that's kind of like a trite example, but bear with me. I'll explain what I mean by that. What I mean by that is you got to understand how you operate, what makes you tick. So we're looking for, initially, right out of the gate, we want someone that's willing to be humble, right? It's that humility. Jocko Willink famously said on a TikTok or Instagram post, the 3 things for a leader: humility, humility, humility. Which I always found kind of ironic coming from a guy like Jocko, who seems to be in a lot of ways sort of the antithesis of humble leadership, but he really is. He's very humble in the way he speaks of leadership and how he approaches it, from what I've heard, and certainly what he advocates for is along those lines. So there's an aspect of that that I think is really, really true. But it's this notion of we call it inner work. This willingness to get introspective, think about yourself, think about how you show up on a day-to-day basis and what that's like and how that affects others. Because you can't hope to lead other people until you can lead yourself first. You can't hope to influence other people until you know what influences you. Something as simple as being able to recognize an emotion in one of your team members is really hard if you don't understand the emotions yourself. If you don't understand what makes you angry, what makes you sad, what makes you happy, it's really hard to influence another human being in a healthy, positive way. You can tell people all you like, you can rely on the rank and command and do what needs to be done that way. But that'll only get you so far. And frankly, it's exhausting. It's far more. Yeah.
Yeah. Just for those who are like maybe unfamiliar with the military and listening to this as like out of curiosity or as a first introduction to the military's view and leadership, it might be a bit surprising to actually have like 2 people and one of the talk, and the first thing that comes out is emotion and self-awareness. It kind of goes against like kind of the movie Hollywood view of what a big military strongman should be. Like, why do we start there with emotions and self-awareness?
Well, like I was saying earlier, right? It's what allows you to see it in others and use those as levers to influence your team, right? Like, and I think back to something as, let's get extreme. Let's talk about something that's quintessentially military in a close combat environment. It's really good as a small unit leader in those really high risk situations to understand what fear looks like in your soldiers, so that you can navigate that and you can work with that. And that is one example where that sort of thing can be really, really useful. You can, like I said, you can order somebody to go do something, but it's far better to shape it and influence them to go do that thing as well. And it doesn't take any more time. It just takes learning the right language, learning the right approach, building and having that connection built ahead of time. And that's, I think, what some people sometimes miss when we talk about, looking at emotion, right? It doesn't mean that we get all introspective. I used to, when I run these workshops and talk about this stuff, I'll talk about, it's not working on yourself, inner work. It's not the time to do that in the attack position, right? Like right before the attack, just before the bullets start start flying, that's not the time to start working on this stuff. Just like that's not the time to start getting in shape, right? As you're about to assault a position, that work's got to be done ahead of time. And you got to do the push-ups and the chin-ups and the runs and build that cardiovascular capability before you go in on the assault. Same thing goes for your inner work. You have to have that strength of character, that self-awareness, that emotional maturity before things get critical. But if you don't mind, Nick, I'd love to circle back to a question that you opened with a few minutes ago, which I think is really important for anyone listening that's doubting whether they have what it takes to be in the CAF. And I would suggest that, and I'm a little unfair in some respects, but I think there's some truth to it, is that for a long time, and certainly in my career, we kind of created good leaders by accident. We did it by making us do hard things, and then we either sink or swim, or our leadership is sort of emerges that way. But like formal leadership training was pretty rare. But that being said, if you're paying attention, and if you're willing to do that inner work, you can learn a lot. And what I really appreciated, especially in the infantry, was the relationship that I had between, as a brand new platoon commander, 23 years of age, the relationship I had with my platoon second in command. And this is a person who's probably old enough to be almost my father, but it really creates this almost leadership apprenticeship. And again, it's why humility is so critical. Because if you come in there thinking you know everything, that relationship's going to be terrible and it's going to be a horrible experience. You're not going to learn a thing. But I came in there somehow, thankfully, with the sufficient amount of humility to listen to this guy. And I learned a lot. And he prevented me from making a bunch of mistakes. And he guided me and kind of put that finishing touch on a lot of my small unit leadership capacities and gave me the confidence to really, at the end of the day, just to be me. Because that other piece that's really important is authenticity. You can't fake it. You can fake it for a couple of days, but then you're going to get exhausted and the troops are going to see right through it. So you got to be you. And for me, I'm not a big yelling, screaming kind of guy. I'm a little bit more reserved, a little quieter. I had a lot of colleagues who were the other way. And every time I tried to emulate that, I fell flat on my face and it was terribly embarrassing. When I was just honest with myself and led the way I could lead, far more effective and sustainable. So we have systems in place. They maybe aren't as deliberate and as intentional as we want them to be. And that's something we're working on right now, is to make those more deliberate, more intentional, and really level up and professionalize our leadership training to the next degree, which I'm really excited about. But make no mistake, there's tremendous opportunity to learn how to lead in the Canadian Armed Forces even today.
I think touching on kind of entry level training is interesting, because we train kind of the nuts and bolts of the skills of doing it, what we could call the technical competence of it. And as you said just a few moments ago, we kind of hope the leadership and the character stuff kind of will emerge or will follow, or that we've kind of chanced on people who already have the nuggets of it, and just giving them the tools will let the experience do the finishing touch. And we've really observed since the publication of Trusted to Serve and Fighting Spirit, a desire to actually train the leadership and the characters aspect of it. In your view, are we far enough? Are there more things that the Canadian Armed Forces and as an institution could do to grow leaders in a more fluid way, or natural way, or a more deliberate way?
Yeah, it's unfair to call that an unfair question, and the reason I say that is because I think it's a great question. I love it. The challenge of where the unfairness comes in is that leadership, like character development, like inner work, it's never enough. There's always more to do. It is a process. It is a journey. There's no finish line where you say, oh yeah, my leadership's good, I can put my feet up and work on the next thing, right? They are constantly evolving, and it is a practice. It is not an objective. And so, yeah, of course, there's more we could do. Absolutely. What I'm excited about with the direction that certainly within our team that we're trying to steer the CAF is really leaning into this idea of inner work and the character piece. And then highlighting that this is not a mission that can be achieved. It is instead, it's a commitment to a practice that is going to hopefully go on for the rest of your life. And, this is why I'm attracted to this field, professionally, is that it's not only is it rewarding professionally, but it's good for me. I sort of alluded to that at the outset. It makes me feel like a better human being. And so the sales pitch to get, in terms of buy-in for the membership, I think should be pretty straightforward, which is this is going to make you a better human. And so for people that are curious about considering a career in the CAF, come join the Canadian Armed Forces. It'll be challenging. There's risks involved. Don't get me wrong. But by and large, the chances are you'll come out the other end a better Canadian, more self-aware, with some leadership capabilities, and some excellent experiences and some stories, and probably some scars, and probably some challenging moments too. But you'll be resilient, and I think that's a really great sort of pitch to put at this. So I'm really excited about the embracing of character that we've seen so far within the CAF, specifically the two models of the leader character framework from the Ivy School and the Values in Action Institute's character strengths and virtues. Those are the two models that have been broadly endorsed by two successive chiefs of defense staff, which is fantastic. And we're hoping that continues and we can continue to implement this. And then what we're doing as well is we've alluded to character a little bit in Trusted to Serve, unpacked it a bit more in Fighting Spirit. And what we're doing now is offering up workshops to units and formations within the CAF that go deeper into character itself. I've had some opportunities out here on the East Coast, working with the Combat Training Center in particular, delivering leader character workshops to instructors at the schools here, some of the units. And it's why I'm here, to integrate and interact with the units out in this part of Canada on a regular basis to bring this to the military. And, we've got the top level direction, but, like we said at the beginning, right, doctrine's great and policies are fantastic, but we need to get it's got to be actionable. And I think nothing is more conducive to creating actionable change than running workshops and leading discussions, and really getting into the nuts and bolts of, what does this look like, as opposed to sitting with a definition, talking about what is it that leaders do? What is it that people of character do? And in particular, I really like the Crossan framework of those 11 dimensions. Each one of those 11 dimensions has a series of elements that are effectively behavioral indicators. And what I mean by that is they are things you can do with the next decision you make, things you can do tomorrow that will help strengthen that dimension of character and bring into balance and, help you make the next right call, the next right move.
So when you give those workshops, your training audience is probably people who are already in leadership roles as instructors or junior leaders. What's their reaction to being given a framework or an academic analysis on how they should do their job?
I'll be honest, I've been pleasantly surprised. And what I mean by that is I come into a room and the reception is at worst neutral, if not kind of eager and wanting to know more and incredibly curious. And then by the end of the workshops, they're all over this stuff. I think it seems to be anyway. I've had a few Marines that are a little skeptical at the outset, but they come around. It's really cool. It's really neat to see. And I think certainly from my perspective, members of the CAF, both commissioned and non-commissioned, are clamoring for this stuff. They want this stuff. This is exactly what's been missing. And those aren't my words. This is some of the stuff that I've heard repeated back to me. This is folks coming up to me after saying, "Hey, thank you so much for this. This is awesome." And I think part of it is it helps build a vocabulary. That's one of the talking points in these workshops is, we provide you and teach you a new vocabulary for how to talk about the things that really matter to leadership that aren't technical, right? And we all know that, mastery of your craft, so tactical acumen, understanding the capabilities of your platoon, or depending on your unit that whichever you're leading, those are really, really important. But equally important, and I would argue probably more important, is understanding the people in your team, because that equipment's going to change. Those tactics are going to evolve, but you got to understand how your people are changing and how you can better lead them and support them and challenge them at the same time. That's really tricky stuff if you aren't, one, aware of yourself, and two, emotionally stunted in terms of the vocabulary. Just on a side note, there's been some research that's been done recently that shows, asked the average person how many emotions they could name, and it was between 3 and 5. right? That's really hard to get a grip of your emotions if you only have 3 to 5 words used that you can explain the entire range of how we feel on a day-to-day basis, let alone see it in others. It's really challenging. So leveling up your vocabulary is a huge piece, and that seems to be what a lot of folks are really, really appreciative of. And then sort of the seeing how they can enact that on a day-to-day basis, and that it doesn't take a lot. What it takes is consistency and a commitment to follow that practice.
And like that kind of trained practical empathy is like that is key to character. Is it different in like day-to-day leadership or in a training environment between instructors and students, or is a leader in any circumstance?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be, the way I like to think of it is like a synth board or a mixing board for an audio system, right? So you've got these different sliders, and you have to dial them constantly. And so there's context is going to drive your character all the time, and situations will certainly dictate. But, and I'll recount a story that one of our instructors on a course I took recently that is, very similar ideas as leading healthy high performance teams. They told a story about when they were doing CQB, so close quarter battles. So this is the really high energy, high intensity, super slick, looks really cool, like ring clearing. So you got a bunch of dudes with guns stacked outside a room, and they're doing drills on how to clear the room, right? And it's sort of like an action movie. This is what's in the stereotypical action movie, especially within the special forces community, right? And so this guy was telling us a story of how somebody took a different approach. Usually when he was trained CQB, there's a person up in the gallery, sort of this catwalk above looking down on the room, and they were just yelling at you, creating more stress. And you kind of learn through survival. And another instructor came in that was a little bit more on this idea of building a relationship, even with students, right? So I'm your instructor, but I'm going to facilitate your learning. I'm not going to dictate your learning. And the guy, the way that the story was recounted to me was he was standing there in the gallery, and after the first evolution, everybody's sweating and breathing heavily and looking up at the instructor, waiting to get yelled at. And the instructor's like chewing an apple, puts the apple down, looks at them and says, "How do you think that went?" Then a couple guys pipe up and say, "I think, blah, 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 blah. Okay, yeah. What would you do differently?" And they piped up a couple things. "Yeah, try this one too. That's all good. You're absolutely right. And try this thing too." And they go off and do it again. And so you don't have to be a jerk. You don't have to be authoritarian in instruction, even in something as high stakes as a close quarter battle. There's tremendous value in building that positive relationship. It requires maturity on both sides, but why not lead with that and let them prove you wrong, as opposed to assuming that they're all incapable of engaging in a mature way with you. And I think there's tremendous space for that. That's how I see it. I think there's and I think back to my military career, even back, early on, I can count on one finger the number of times I had to say to somebody, "That's an order." The rest of the time I was just talking, just building that relationship, communicating, explaining, expressing. And that doesn't matter whether it was patrol orders in Afghanistan or a training exercise or just having a chat in the company lockers. It was just about building and leveraging that relationship that you built with your soldiers, with your team.
Well, and that aspect of team keeps coming back, and I think like the leader is not a isolated individual that just sends orders and direction to a team to execute, right? The leader is part of that team, and those relationships that you're talking about are what make this work better. Do you talk in your leadership workshops about what makes a good leadee or follower, a member of a team?
Yeah, I do actually, and I don't know if this is just lazy on my part, but it's the same stuff. You gotta the lowest bar, I would say, for anybody, right? So if you are I know I move the lowest, so I shouldn't say the lowest bar. You're the lowest member of an organization in terms of positional authority or hierarchy or what have you. Start with leading yourself. All of this stuff we just talked about still applies, right? do that inner work, understand how you tick, understand what makes other people tick, be able to see it in other people, work on your character, build that capability to influence, because you don't need position to lead. I'll tell you a story about my daughter. She's just into grade 9 now, so she played middle school basketball for 3 years, grade 6, 7, and 8. And that was the first time she played. She hadn't picked up a basketball till grade 6. She was learning while she was doing. And super steep learning curve. And by grade 8, she's starting most games, but she wasn't really the team captain, right? She didn't have the positional authority of the team captain, the team leader. But I'll tell you, the team fed off her. If she allowed herself to get in her head, misses a shot, gets bumped, doesn't get a call, and starts doubting herself, and her energy drops, the rest of the team felt that. And the other 4 girls just kind of crumbled. If she was strong and engaged, they fed off that. And that team was almost unstoppable. So she was leading, no question, just by her presence, just by her example. So you don't need rank or position to be able to do that. And I think, there's an old saying that leaders are more influential than they think. I think everybody is more influential than they think. Not that goes to your head and that everybody's thinking about you, on a spotlight and stuff like that, but you have impact on others. And so why not make that positive? Why not make it so that when you interact with people, they come away and say, I want to talk more with that guy. I want to hang out with that guy. That's a cool person to be around. I think that's sort of like the baseline. That it's all the same starting point. And then as you do that, this is one of the things that I think we both had it drilled into our heads early, which is spot on, is you can't lead until you can follow. Right. And I think a lot of the truth to that comes from this idea that you got to understand yourself. Right. And you can't lead if you don't understand yourself, and you can't be led. I guess you can be commended without having much schmick about yourself, but you can't really lead. You can't really be led if you don't understand what makes you tick. It makes it really tough. It certainly doesn't make it as rewarding. You got to do things because you have to, not because you want to.
I like it. I think it's very Socratic to kind of know yourself first.
Absolutely.
And there's kind of a wisdom in that really transcend military affairs, right? It's it has to do with understanding that you're not kind of an isolated agent operating at a distance from the world, that it affects you, you affect it. And that even in that team environment, it is a kind of a joint product of what everyone's putting into that. I'd like to touch on another concept that's been, I would say that wasn't there so much when I started my own journey in leadership about the same time as yours, about 25 years ago, but has now been kind of so key, we've put it right in the title, and that concept is trust. Can you tell me about the relationship between leadership and trust?
Yeah, it's another really key concept, and there's a bunch of different directions we could take it. The first thing I think, and we play with this, not so much in Trust to Serve, but certainly in Fighting Spirit, we play with this distinction. And again, there's a risk that we get a little too academic with it, but I think it's important. Trust is really cool, it's important, but it's an action. It's a verb. Trust is a verb. We can't control that as individuals. When I talk about focusing on yourself, doing the inner work, doing the work, you can't control whether someone's going to trust you or not. That's their choice. But what you can do is create trustworthiness. And so we play with that distinction in Fighting Spirit and say, really what we want to focus on, as if we're looking at individuals and what it is that leaders need to bring, they need to be trustworthy. And like the name implies, that they need to be worthy of the trust, right? So it's an important distinction, because if you just focus on the trust piece, why do you trust me? Well, I don't trust you because, you are dishonest, you lie, cheat, and steal, right? That kind of thing. So I like to focus on this idea of trustworthiness. And then we have, the trust equation that we talk about. And it's mathematically, largely logically consistent, but, if we go too far, it can fall apart. But it's really just a euphemism or a parable. Look at euphemism for, or I don't even know what the proper English term would be. So I'm not going to try to pretend, but it's not to be taken literally as a mathematical concept, but it's kind of cute, which is that it's equal parts character and competence multiplied by commitment, right? So you got to know what you're doing. right? You gotta have that technical capability. So when with the military context as an infantry officer, I got that tactical acumen, understand the weapon systems in my unit, and that's important. That's my competence. The character is I got to know who I am. I got to be a good human being, right? And then you put those two together and you multiply it by how hard I work, my grit, my commitment, my fighting spirit, right? That's where the title comes from for that book. Now I got trustworthiness. Now my soldiers are going to look at me and go, okay, I'll follow that guy. You know, he's someone who is worthy of my trust. And now I've got a team that's working. But if I zero out any one of those, I got problems. And I think one of the reasons why the formula, the way we wrote it or framed it is instructive is that you need both, but you can get by with only one. But it's far more effective to have both. And so I think for a long time, we tried to get by with just the competence and commitment piece, which is, that worked for a while. It worked, but it wasn't as good as it could have been. And ultimately, if there's no commitment, it doesn't matter how good your character is, how good your competence is. If there's no drive, no determination, no fighting spirit, it's kind of a wash. And so, there's the research around that, this trustworthiness distinction that comes from Russell Hardin, who was a sociologist that literally wrote the book on trust. It's called Trust, which is pretty cool. And the whole idea of grit being multiplicative is from Carolyn Dweck's book that she called Grit. So it's, and she says, effort counts twice. So it's kind of cute, but I think it makes the point that when we start talking about what makes someone trustworthy, it's those three elements, right? It's character, commitment, competence that we're really after. And you got to have all three to really make this work. And there's literature on swift trust that talks about this too. Rob Engin's got a fantastic book called Stranger in Arms, where he looks at this from a historical perspective. The fantastic question, which is, given that all this, and it's really apt to the discussion we're having right now, which is, if all this idea of relationship building and knowing your team is so critical, how in the hell did the replacements in the Second World War during the European campaign not degrade performance, right? Because these are folks getting parachuted in ones and twos that don't know the units they're coming into, and vice versa, and yet the units continue to perform. And what we get is swift trust. And so it becomes a proxy for those things that we just talked about, because they all went through the same depot, they went through the same training system. And so there's this element of, hey, I know you went through the same thing I did, so I think you got the competence down, and they wouldn't have put you through if you had some character deficiencies. So, and then there's a willingness along the people that are receiving and onboarding the replacements to give them the benefit of the doubt. So it's trust but verify. So it's kind of contingent, but it worked, right? And I think so. This notion of swift trust, especially for teams that are rapidly forming for a short duration, can be really important. But then the question is, what do we need institutionally to create those conditions? Well, we need standardized training. We need to make sure that the experience that they go through is consistent, of high quality and rigorous. That there's that confidence that's built in the institution, in the larger membership, that folks have come through, say, battle school or basic training, and that they've got what it takes to do this. So it's this fascinating area.
And that standardization of approach, of training, of mentality that like militaries and government, they like to write things down, right? So that there's a standard, that it's replicable, that we can learn from it, but also, especially in a country as big as Canada, that it's done somewhat homogeneously across the different training institution across the country. So the latest two element of leadership doctrine in Canada, trusted to serve and fighting spirits, how do they differ from their previous predecessor? So the previous elements of leadership doctrine in Canada before those.
Yeah, so I think the big thing is that it's not really leadership doctrine per se. It's related. It's leadership adjacent. It's profession of arms doctrine, and that's an important distinction, because we're not replacing the 4 volumes of leadership in the Canadian Forces that were written between 2005 2007. Those are still extant, if you will. They're still in force. What we did, though, with trusted to serve and fighting spirit was replace duty with honor. So that's been replaced by those 2 volumes. But duty with honor absolutely set the conditions for the leadership doctrine that would follow, and is absolutely critical in creating the box, if you will, in which our leadership doctrine is created. And so they're very closely related, 100%. And in fact, our next step within our team is to start looking at a more tactically oriented leadership manual that will build on the good work that's in leadership in the Canadian Forces. But, those books are now almost 20 years old. One of them's over 20 years old. We need to refresh them and renew them. And the thing is that there's good stuff in there. They're very, very detailed. They're rich. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Nothing's really wrong. It's just not applicable. You can't take that and say, okay, now I know how to lead tomorrow. And so we're taking a really pragmatic approach and putting out, 100-page manual, basically, for, kind of along the lines of what Dandridge Malone did in 1983, that book I talked about earlier, Small Unit Leadership. We want to create something like that. What's that book that tells you what a leader does? It's rooted in good research and valid, and is going to set our junior leaders up for success and start putting some intentionality behind our leadership training and really professionalizing how we do leadership and turning us pro.
So that book, if it or when it comes to fruition, clearly intended toward military leaders, are the principles that make a good military leaders transferable to outside the military context? Does it make a good manager? Does it make a good director or CEO?
I think so. Yeah. And there's a lot of evidence to support that. Lots of very successful companies that have been helmed by veterans. There's an entire industry of veterans turned leadership consultants. I mentioned one earlier, Jocko Willing, probably one of the most well-known, right? A former Navy SEAL turned leadership consultant. Canada has our own group of folks that do that. I think they're absolutely applicable. There's tweaks and changes, but I kind of go back to this was why I like the expression, I've only had to order somebody once in my life, right? Because if you're, as a military leader, relying on your rank to get the job done, you're doing it wrong, right? So yeah, the lessons are absolutely true. There's nothing that is not applicable in the private sector or in the government to knowing yourself and knowing your people, making a call, knowing how to make a call, knowing how to weigh the pros and cons, knowing how to approach different challenges and knowing how to approach the nuances of your team and how each person needs to be led a little differently. None of that changes when you take the uniform off. The stakes become perhaps a little less fraught, a little less existential, but you still got to lead. And the lessons are absolutely applicable. I think there's tons of transferability.
So as I'm preparing to close this, if you referred to a lot of key reading material that influenced you, if you had to make a recommendation to someone listening to this who says, hey, leading is important to me, I'd like to get better, but for some reason I can only read one book, which one would it be?
You're constraining me to one, eh?
Yes.
That's brutal. Okay, one book. I'll play by those rules. It would be, and I've mentioned it a couple of times already, it would be Small Unit Leadership by Dandridge Malone. I've gifted that book to a bunch of folks who I've crossed paths with. I've recommended it to just about everybody who asks, including you now. It was given to me by my father when I joined the Air Cadets. I've used it ever since, and it's been amazing. My version is dog-eared, worn out, and well read and well loved. And I was using it just last week even. So yeah.
Well, thank you for this recommendation. I hope many of us will add it to their to-read list. And on this, thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, and for sharing it with all of us.
No, it's my pleasure, Nick. Thank you so much for the opportunity. This was a ton of fun.